Okay. Well, hey guys, I was just going to hop on and explain a few things. Perhaps a few people had some questions. Sometimes we post videos whenever it comes time for us to feed the bees. We do it whenever it's warm or warmer. Generally, we have a week in January where it is 50 degrees or so, and we try to get in there and we wait for that time because bees have their own way of ventilating, generating heat, of cooling a hive. So you'll see them in the summertime. They'll line up at the entrance of a hive. If this were a hive box, they'll line up at the entrance, fan their wings, and they'll develop their own draft to cool the hive. Well, in the wintertime, they'll all clump together. Most of the time around the queen or the brood that they're still rearing in the winter, and they'll vibrate and they'll generate a heat for themselves. And it's really amazing how efficient they are at regulating their temperature. And so I wanted to explain a little bit more of what's going on. So there's an unfortunate circumstance, and this happens whenever we check in the winter. It could be that we lose a hive during that point, which is why I like to get in there early, because if it has been cold, I don't have to deal with wax moths or things that will get in and they destroy the wax, they consume the honey, they defecate, and they lay eggs and larvae, so they'll take over a weaker hive. So it's a huge problem, and it's a total loss in most cases if they get in there. And the only way to really get rid of them when you clean your things out is to freeze. You have to freeze all of those parts that you intend to save to hopefully kill any wax moth larvae. So there was an unfortunate event. I did lose a couple of hives, and what I will do is sometimes if I catch it early enough where bees haven't robbed, wax moths haven't got in, I'll actually use any honey stores that they had instead of what we make. If I've got a weak box, I'll add that honey box to them, because I leave two deeps, which you're kind of seeing in the corner of a frame, and that's theirs. That's where brood is, which is the baby bees, and then honey. They'll fill that up with honey. They work all summer to store for winter, just like we do. We work all summer with our gardens, and we store for winter. And I'm going to show you a few things. And so this is a well-rounded video, I hope, so that you can understand a little of what goes on. So this is frame that come out of one of my lost hives. And this is honey. Right here it's capped. That has wax that's been put over the top of it. And we could actually poke in there, which I'm not. I'll likely extract this or find somewhere to put it in. But that is good, pure honey. And there's times you'll also see some other things. I don't hear all of this is capped, but we see how sporadic it is. So I'm not sure if they were already eating on some of this or something for their stores in the winter. But there are other times you'll see here, and I'm going to try to get, let's see, it'll glisten in here for you. But see, this is uncapped, but there's something inside of there. Now you'll see uncapped honey, but here what we have is actually, I don't know how close I can get because of the lighting, but there is pollen. There are pollen stores in there. So, yeah, so Rachel's going to maybe dig some of that out. So
it's not really focusing.
It's not going to focus, but yeah. So they store pollen as well as creating honey or anything like that. So they do a really great job of storing for themselves. But you're going to see when you get in your hive, if the brood where they lay their eggs and they grow, it will be spotted, spread out. That's signs of something wrong with your queen, who's maybe is growing old, not laying well, sick, anything. And so we like to see tight group patterns for the brood, realizing they're able to keep them warm, they're able to feed them well, she's laying well. And we want to see honey really in the same way. We want to see our frames filled all the way out. There's things that we can do to help that. When you're checking them in the fall, like as you rob your honey, or say in the spring even, advice that I often give is that you can checkerboard your hives. If you notice that, well, they're filling out these frames and trying to move up, you can checkerboard and do a full one, an empty one, a full one, an empty one to get them to draw it out quicker, because we want to help them and motivate them to get a good full honey store for the wintertime. And these, I believe, might have had an issue with the queen, and they could have gotten too warm. So we want them to have honey. That's the best. It's the most nutritious. It has all the same benefits that we glean from, and the reason we desire it. We want them to have honey. I do not want to do this. In an ideal situation, if my hives are full, both boxes full of honey, they do not get any sugar water, spring or summer. In the spring, I try to feed almost all of them just to jump start them to get to. They've depleted their stores, and so I want to get them all going. Give them enough energy where when things are bleak and not yet growing, and they can draw out, make any repairs to comb, and have what they need to carry them into the early blossom of our dandelions. Most of the time dandelions, and then our purple nettle and violet, and then as the season goes, it changes. So in those instances, we make a syrup for them. It's easy to do at home. You don't have to buy it, from expensive beekeeper stores, anything like that. And it's with white sugar. You do not want to use. Sometimes in our minds we overthink things. We think, oh, I want to get natural. I'm going to get some whatever. They got all kinds of brown sugar or agave sugar or whatever. Don't do any of this. And the reason is because those brown sugars and natural sugars, they're good for you, but for the bees, those sugars hold the molasses content, which is actually those natural little impurities, and for the bees that can cause dysentery. We recognize they're small, they're literally gleaning from the purest, most delicate part of a flower. They're getting nectar and the pollen, and they're creating a very pure honey that's perfectly preserved. They don't need that molasses content, and they certainly don't need the dysentery that could come along with that. And so, though this looks dark and brown and things, honey, as with the wax, has natural antimicrobial properties, and so it's a preserver. That's why honey does not go bad. It keeps well. So with white sugar alone, just regular white, pure white granulated sugar, you can buy it in large bags from the store, and you mix that with water. And so you can see this stuff here is really thin. This is my spring mixture. So in the spring, they're not going to store any of this. They are literally going to use this for their own consumption and get started in working, repairing their hives and things like that. So this has much more water content. So I mix this a 1-to-1. 1 cup of sugar, 1 cup of water, and that's what you get. Okay, and in the fall you're going to mix that 2-to-1. You want a thicker mixture, so it's more sustainable. They don't need near the moisture content because they have stored honey, and you don't want it freezing, things like that. And so you got 2 cups of sugar for 1 cup of water, and that's the thicker, so that they use that, or if they do convert, they can convert that to honey, and they'll be able to have that. It's a little bit more usable for their stores. But I do want to talk about this because obviously if you mix sugar water, you're going to have sugar water, and it's going to be as light as water, and your sugar is going to settle in the bottom, things like that. But don't put your sugar into a boiling pan, because again, if you burn that, and there's actually a chemical breakdown that occurs to where you're carbonizing that sugar. These are neat little experiments. You can burn sugar and it turns black and you can see a molecular change. But we don't want to do that. Again, we don't want to risk the dysentery in the bees. So I boil my water, and I literally put the sugar right in the buckets. I know about how much. So if I want a 1-to-1 ratio, I'll fill it up to about here. If I want a 2-to-1, I'm going to fill it almost all the way up. And I explained, you notice I didn't go halfway, and I want to explain that here in a minute. But first, fill your buckets of sugar, and then boil your water, get it nice and hot, and then pour that water in slowly until you get your desired volume, and make sure you get all your bubbles out, and mix and stir until it completely dissolves. So if I were to show you on the inside of this bucket, which I've got a little bit of debris that has gotten in this one, but you can see straight to the bottom, there's no little sugar in the bottom, nothing, not any particulates, there's nothing, no granules you can dip your finger in, and it's just, it feels like water or syrup, no granules at all, not like candy or anything else. You don't want the sugar to cook, so you want to keep it moving. You don't want to make candy. You don't want hardened things, or so that it doesn't drain through your bucket well. So that's what you do. You mix up your sugar by those parts. Now there's something interesting that happens, and the reason on these measurements that you don't have to get too scientific, but just realize that if I add 1 cup of sugar and 1 cup of water, I do not end up with 2 cups of syrup. What happens is obviously there's minuscule amounts of airspace, but even at a molecular level, the sugar, if you've got a sugar molecule and your water molecules, they sort of begin to interlock to create this syrup, and they fit in such a way that if you mix 1 cup of sugar, 1 cup of water, you end up with about 1.5 cups of syrup. And that's really neat when you understand that molecular binding. That means this syrup stays syrup. This is old. This is a bucket that was left because I lost a hive. So I had a hive I was going to feed. I intended to feed, and I couldn't because it wasn't there. So this sugar keeps. This is old syrup that can still be fed. But see, it's bound. It doesn't separate. It doesn't dry out and leave sugar at the bottom or anything like that because of that molecular composition that has occurred. So that's kind of neat, really. But we're doing that. Now I want to say something about this bucket. This is one that I bought from a store somewhere, and so all it is, it's got a lid. It's got there's tiny little holes that you won't be able to see, but I have a large sewing needle, and I literally just poke holes. You can make these yourself. Like we have projects that maybe involve where we buy baking soda in larger, like gallon buckets or so, gallon and a half buckets, and we save all those buckets and lids. We don't want any thing with detergent, anything. We want everything to be clean, and we can poke holes in those bucket lids. And then what happens when you pour water through it? So here's an example. We've got one. This is still being used for baking soda, but it's got a nice clip lock lid with a seal in it. Man, I can use that. I can poke holes in that, small, just a pinhole size, because it's just going to form a little water droplet. Because we're going to turn that upside down on the top of a hive where our little entrance hole is, and it's going to form those little water droplets. The bees will fit up under here because there's a little rim, and they're going to go around and get that off of those water droplets off of those pinholes. So that's something useful. But something to recognize too, these particular lids, I found out I had to convert over to my other buckets because either these holes were too big or the seal is not adequate, and they didn't seem to do well with the spring mixture. So I don't know if it was just because my syrup is thin or if it's a defect in the buckets. So you always come across what you don't want to do is turn over a bucket and flood your hive. You don't want that. You want it to just form those little water droplets with the surface tension where they can come and suck away, and another water droplet will follow in right behind it. So those are some of the things that are concerned with. Like I said, you can make it out of whatever. Entrance feeders. There's all sorts of really neat little feeders out there, and you can spin whatever you want to, but it's simple to make as well. The other buckets that I use were ones that I bought that come with a no holes, but a larger hole cut out with a fine mesh wire screen, stainless wire screen that's in the center that keeps that from going through too quickly. So I hope that answers a few questions. Again, you don't want to feed them all the time. Sometimes, you get some of these commercial beekeepers that have a constant feeder. You see them trying to advertise community feeders, and don't. Listen, bees they're prone to laziness like anyone. They go to the nearest and simplest food sources, and what you're going to end up with is what you don't want to end up with is honey that's been made from syrup. It's a noticeable difference whenever you see some. I don't have any honey from spring, because what they make their syrup out of matters. We'll get an early spring honey, and it'll be a bright yellow, very clear, more thin, and it's good. It's sweet. It's not my preference. It's not what a lot of people like whenever they have raw honey, but this is what I want. And what I'm going to show you is I'm actually going to see if we can. So up here, I throw a section of comb in there so that you can utilize, and I always like to do this. I like to see, and so I can kind of see like what is that viscosity and what, how clear, how pure, and what you're going to see that appeared to be slightly foggy or something else. Listen, we don't filter. I don't heat my honey. We don't, even in the products. If Rachel makes elderberry syrup for us and the kids, she makes her syrup, again, removes that from the heat. Once it cools, then she adds the honey, so it's not been heated. All of your live cultures, your enzymes, none of that is broken down, and all of the pollen content that I showed you in this frame, some of that gets extracted because it's flung out centrifugally, and so you get some of that pollen content that maybe is an allergen and it's been processed and preserved in honey. So man, it's a lot of cool things that go on there. I hope that gives you an inside look. Maybe one day we'll be at a capacity where we can have some observation hives and or classes, let you come and get involved. But man, it is a wonderful little project and a family craft, and also it provides something that's very enjoyable, and listen, is wonderful for trade. This is a wonderful currency, and it's a great gift, a great blessing, and so that's what we see that as. This is they're giving back to us from their hard work, and as we try to help them and enable them. So I hope that answers some questions. We don't feed our bees regular. We don't want them coming to sugar when there's work to be done, flowers to be pollinated, crops, our gardens. We want them to work. And you'll find it's a real issue. You'll have bees from this hive come in and steal honey from the neighboring hive. They will rob one another, and we don't like that sort of criminal behavior. I'm the only one that gets to rob honey. But anyway, we hope that you enjoy that, that you learned something. If you've got questions, keep them coming. Like Rachel said, hey, some people's got some questions. Would you do a breakdown? That's what we're here for. Even through the foundation, all of our endeavors are to educate. We want everybody to be able to do this, to enjoy this, to see God's hand at work in nature and in the home. So God bless you guys. Be safe, and we'll talk to you again later.